Hello, I am Ann Mahar with Safe and Just Michigan, and we want to welcome and thank you for joining Safe and Just Michigan and the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness for today's webinar about expungement in Michigan. Today's webinar is designed to explain Michigan's recent expansion of expungement and introduce resources available to folks in order to explore getting an expungement. We will answer some questions at the end of the presentation, but we will not be able to answer questions about specific cases. However, we will be providing links in the chat throughout the program where you can get some of those questions answered. Everyone at Safe and Just Michigan is thrilled you are participating. We have muted your microphones to ensure that everyone can hear the panel, but please feel free to ask any questions you have using the chat function. At the end of the event, participants will answer questions for as long as time allows. You can also engage with Safe and Just Michigan on our social media channels or visit our website. In a few seconds, or it was already up, you'll see a poll on your screen. We hope you'll fill it out so we can get an accurate but anonymous picture of who attended the event today. Thank you in advance for participating in our poll. It is now my pleasure to turn things over to our MC for today's event, Laura Birchfield.
Thank you. Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laurel Birchfield, and I am the Associate Director at the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness, or MICAH. I will be your MC for the event, discussing Michigan's recent expansion of the expungement process. And let me just say thank you very quickly to Safe and Just Michigan for doing all of this amazing work and bringing this information to all of you so that we can see this important legislation enacted into reality and see all of the benefits for the folks that we serve. So thank you, Safe and Just Michigan. Now, formerly incarcerated people are almost 10 times more likely to be homeless than people in the general public. And even for formerly incarcerated people who have secured housing, they are more often than not housing insecure. It is estimated that as many as 570 out of every 10,000 formerly incarcerated people are housing insecure. The expansion of expungement by petition and eventually automatic record sealing will allow many formerly incarcerated people to finally be able to walk into a rental office with a real chance at procuring safe and secure housing, which is why MICAH, along with Safe and Just Michigan, are hosting this event today, in order to help service providers get a good feel for what the new expungement legislation means for your guests and your clients, and how best to get the available resources to them. Our first speaker today will be Josh Howe. Josh is a policy analyst at Safe and Just Michigan and worked for several years to expand expungement in Michigan. Hi, Josh, and thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Laurel. I'm Josh Howe. I'm a policy analyst at Safe and Just Michigan. My job today is to let you know about the recent expansion of Michigan's expungement laws. So first, what is expungement? In Michigan, an expungement is called a set-aside, which means the record still exists and can be used by law enforcement, but it's not available to the public. Prior to the passage of this new expungement law, people in Michigan could expunge up to 1 felony and 2 misdemeanors. We'll talk more about that previous system in a few minutes, and later John will be telling you about how the system has changed under the new laws. But first, why did we need to change the expungement law? Well, the first set of reasons deals with the massive collateral consequences criminal records have on formerly incarcerated people and their families. As you see from the slide, a massive number of people are impacted by criminal records, and there are very large costs to our economy. As the chief investment strategist for Fifth Third Bank, Jeffrey Korzenik, explained in his new book, Untapped Talent, our deepest and broadest labor opportunity comes from the ranks of those underemployed because of a criminal record. He also suggested that based on historical precedent, our labor force participation rates, adjusted for age and sex, suggest that our unusual social ills have sapped the labor force of workers we would need to supply 2 to 3 years of additional growth at our baseline pace. Multiply those years of forsaken growth by the value of a year's GDP, and those years worth of missing workers equates to around $1 trillion in forsaken growth, not someone else's trillion, ours. So as you can see, just the investment in formerly incarcerated people in the labor market is going to have huge potential effects. And we need to do things to try to, one of the things that I think lawmakers were worried about is how we could best try to reincorporate people into the labor market. And possibly the biggest reason is because criminal records and the collateral consequences from criminal records generate what I call radical insecurity. If you think about it, The most important things in our lives are things like having safe and secure housing, having employment and a livable wage, and good community connections. Having a good, safe place to sleep, being able to feel part of your community, and having some money in your pocket generates safety, and the opposite generates insecurity. In particular, as Laurel explained at the beginning of this webinar, a criminal record can result in large numbers of people being housing insecure or even becoming homeless. I know from my own experience, when I came home from incarceration, it seemed almost impossible to imagine returning to a world of housing security. Almost every landlord excluded formerly incarcerated people, and only a few properties in my entire county would allow formerly incarcerated people to rent. Each year, approximately 700,000 individuals return home from state prisons across the United States, and an additional 9 million are released from county jails. More than 10% of those coming in and out of our prisons and jails are homeless or housing insecure in the months preceding and following their incarceration. Since most people returning from incarceration return to their communities often with fractured support system, poor work histories, and a host of collateral sanctions precluding them from government assistance, and also facing very real housing and employment discrimination, it's not difficult to see why rates of homelessness would be double those of the general population, including many people who are competing in the same in the same zero-sum affordable housing market. Could you change the slide, please, John? A second problem with Michigan's previous system of expungement was a problem of uptake. As I mentioned before, prior to the passage of this current legislative package, Michigan had an expungement process, but it had several problems. The process was limited despite huge numbers of people being impacted, with more and more people added and very few subtracted every year. Despite these growing numbers, only 3,000 expungements were granted every year. Go to the next slide. So what was included in the old system and what made it so clunky and slow on the uptake? Well, first, expungement only worked if you had no more than 1 felony or 2 misdemeanors on your record. And generally, charging documents and plea bargains tend to favor multiple felony and misdemeanor charges. So when people finished with the criminal justice system, they'd almost always end up with more than 1 felony and 2 misdemeanors. Also, applications were and are complex and resource intensive. The applications must be filed in the convicting court regardless of where someone lives. The costs were very high. The cost of an application ran around $150 without a lawyer, and as much as 10 times that with a lawyer. You had to submit multiple copies of a complex application. The judge could, and often did, deny your appeal for expungement, and before you even got to being in front of that judge, you had to get fingerprinted and returned to a court, which can be a real barrier for many people who are directly impacted. It can be very traumatic to have to go back to a court. Finally, the processing time was at least 6 months in most courts. I should mention here that, as John will discuss later, the petition process was expanded in the legislative process package that passed, and that process was altered in some ways, which might make uptake more likely compared to the previous system. Change the slide, please. So why else has this process failed? Another of the major reasons that the process failed is that many of the crimes that are most likely to give someone a criminal record were excluded from the possibility of expungement. For instance, traffic offenses, which represent 50% of all criminal cases, were excluded from consideration. And change the slide. So a final impetus for why Michigan changed its expungement process involved 2 academic studies. First, there was a study by Nakamura and Blumstein, which found that over time, people with criminal records who refrain from committing new crimes actually become statistically safer than people in the general population who have never committed a crime before. Second, more recently, here in Michigan, research by Sonia Starr and J.J. Prescott of the University of Michigan Law School was published. This research was particularly significant, not just because they were from Michigan, but because they were able to use de-identified data from actual felony expungements in Michigan, cross-referenced with employment data. What they found was that expungements promote economic productivity and likely improve public safety. They concluded that policymakers should maximize expungements
Hi, this is John. I'm next. I think we lost Josh.
It was needed. Michigan changed the process in two ways. First, it greatly expanded the petition process for expungement. And second, it created an automatic expungement process. So how did we get to automatic expungement? Well, as the result of tireless work of a group of folks at Community Legal Services of Philadelphia, for over 6 years, Pennsylvania became the first state to pass, that worked for over 6 years, Pennsylvania became the first state to pass an automatic record sealing law in 2018. The legend is that one of the lawyers at Community Legal Services of Philadelphia came up with the idea while sharing a bottle of wine with a friend at the Center of American Progress. And since then, it's kind of caught on all across the country. There have been versions of it that have passed in Pennsylvania, in Utah, and here in Michigan.
It looks
Hey,
like we.
I can
Sorry,
jump in.
Okay.
Hi, we're actually to the point in the presentation where I was going to take over anyway. So the timing is good.
Order that seals all eligible records and issues a record sealing notice to other state record keepers. Until now, as you can see, most of these laws only applied to non-conviction and low-level misdemeanors. I'm sure John will tell you more about how all that works during his presentation. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll now turn things back over to Laurel and John.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you, everyone. I know we had a little bit of a technology glitch there, so thank you for your patience, and Josh, thank you so much for sharing this information with us. So next, we are going to hear from our second speaker, John Cooper, who is the Executive Director of Safe and Just Michigan. John is also an attorney and led Safe and Just efforts to expand expungement in Michigan. John?
Thanks so much, Laurel, and thank you, Josh, and everyone who's here with us today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the legislative campaign that ran in Michigan and led to the passage of the new laws, and then I'm going to talk about the legal standards that are now in effect for petitioning for expungement and some of the resources that are available to help people petition. So our campaign really started after the Pennsylvania law passed and the research came out from the University of Michigan. That was released in early 2019, and that's around the time our campaign started as well. Bills were not introduced until fall 2019 as a result of a lot of legislative conversations about the scope and how best to address the policy problems we're trying to solve. But once bills were introduced, they moved quite quickly through the House. They were voted out of the House by a very large margin in early November 2019. They kind of got stuck in the Senate after that. Part of that was there's a bunch of policy issues that needed to be worked out, but the other part was that COVID hit in mid-March, and the legislature, to its credit, didn't give up on this issue. It kept working on the technical challenges that needed to be overcome to implement an automatic expungement. And it also kept on doing committee hearings over Zoom, which was a new thing in Michigan. So once committee stuff got started again, the bills were heard in the Senate. That was in June 2020. And eventually the bills did pass out of the Senate and were approved by the House again, and were signed by the governor in October of last year. So there were a bunch of really important changes to the eligibility criteria for the expungement process in Michigan. As Josh mentioned, one of the really important expansions was making traffic offenses eligible for the first time. Traffic offenses are half of all criminal cases in the state and are among the most common offenses for people to have on their records. In addition, up to 3 felonies are now eligible to be sealed, in some cases more, if multiple felony charges came out of a single arrest. And that's what the transactional counting rules apply to. In addition, there's no longer a 2 misdemeanor limit. There are no formal limits on the number of misdemeanors that can be sealed. However, there are some limits on the number of assaultive crimes and identical crimes that can be expunged. There's also new waiting periods for expungement. You can apply for 3 years to clear misdemeanors instead of 5. And you can apply for multiple felonies to be sealed after 7 years. In addition, they created a new marijuana misdemeanor expungement process that's a little bit different from the existing process. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. The second piece of the legislative package, and this is not in effect yet, it's not currently scheduled to go into effect until 2023, although we're optimistic that it will go into effect in some places before then. So this is saying, because petition process is totally inadequate to solve the problems that we have in the state. There's only about 3,000 petitions granted a year when there's 3 million people with records and another 250,000 convictions every year. This automatic system will help address that backlog. The current estimates we've seen are that 500,000 to 1 million people will see their criminal convictions sealed as a result of this law. And here's how it will work. After 7 years, all low-level misdemeanors, that is ones that are punishable by less than 93 days in jail, all of those will be sealed as a matter of course 7 years after the date of conviction. In addition, higher level misdemeanors will be sealed after 7 years from conviction. And the higher level ones are the ones that are more than 93 days as a maximum punishment. There's also eligibility for felony convictions. After 10 years, up to 2 nonviolent felonies will be automatically sealed. There's some carve-outs from that, but when we say nonviolent, we mean drug or property crime are eligible. Assaultive crimes are not, but drug and property crimes are a large segment of the overall conviction records that we see. And we anticipate quite a few people benefiting from the felony expungement provisions here too. And just a word on the difference between the petition process and the automatic. So the petition process has broader eligibility criteria. There's more crimes that are eligible, and a broader number of convictions can be sealed through the petition process. However, that is a process that is overseen by a judge. The judge has the discretion to deny a petition. And, the automatic system does not have any costs associated with it. It's just going to happen automatically. And significantly, it's going to happen automatically, even for people that have unpaid fines and fees. And, that's roughly half, we estimate, of the people with records have outstanding fines and fees and other court debt. So here are some basic tips on how to navigate the traditional expungement process. I've got a picture here of the court form you need to use. It's MC 227. And essentially, to go through this form, all the instructions are there. But here are some tips. So first, confirm what's actually on a person's record. And this is important because the state police database, which is what is available through the iChat online search inquiry, it doesn't always have accurate records. Most cases it does, but for the lowest level misdemeanors, it's pretty common for some or all of the less than 93-day misdemeanors on a person's record to be only within local court records and not in the state police database. So it's worth, if you know your client or a person you're working with to clear their record, if you know that person has low-level misdemeanors in a particular place, or you think they might, it's worth checking the local court records. You can access those online, look at the register of actions, and that should tell you what convictions actually were issued. Second, and this is really important, confirm your client or the person's eligibility under the new law. Now, there are significant expansions in the laws that were passed, but there's also carve-outs to some of the eligibility that has made the law more complicated. And I'm encouraging people to take advantage of the free legal resources that are available, and I'll summarize those later. But it's good to get a lawyer to look at your eligibility criteria, given what was done with the new law. Third, it's important to look what court issued the convictions, because the petition process is tied to specific courts. So if you have, say, traffic cases or traffic convictions in Oakland, Macomb, and Wayne County, that means the petition needs to be filed in all three places, not just in one of them. And that is incidentally another advantage of the automatic process, is you don't need to file in multiple places. You don't need to file at all. So for people with convictions in multiple places, the automatic process could be really helpful. Fourth, check on the local practice for fines and fees. I've heard from lawyers that do expungement work in various places that it's often the case that the judge hearing the petition will ask a person whether they have outstanding fines and fees, and if they do, ask them to pay those off and come back, or simply deny the petition. I know, for example, this is a common practice in Detroit, and the free expungement service provider that we recommend in Detroit, Project Clean Slate, which is a project of the city, they do not accept people for their waiting list if they have unpaid fines and fees, because the Detroit judges tend to deny petitions that fit that description. Fifth, gather all the required documentation. And for the standard process, there's quite a bit of it. There are certified court records, you got to get fingerprinted. There's a $50 fee to send to the state police so they can do an FBI background check, which the FBI background check is for all states. So one of the things the judge will be looking at in the hearing, by the way, is whether a person has convictions in other states, and they can take those convictions into account in deciding whether to grant the petition. Sixth, make sure you complete all procedural requirements. They're laid out on the court form, but they're really important and can get overlooked if a person is not paying close attention to what they need to do. And finally, and this is, I think, as important as anything else here, prepare for the hearing, because the judge wants to see an argument made that a person has changed their life since the conviction happened. They've done good things. I know in Detroit, for example, judges like to hear about community service and other sort of community beneficial activities. That's not required under the statute, but because judges have a great deal of discretion about whether to grant a petition, it is good to make the case that the person who's applying is an upstanding citizen, getting letters of support from employers, from colleagues at church, other community groups is helpful ultimately in persuading a judge to grant a petition. So that's a lot. And I think that gives you a taste of why many people do not end up applying for expungement. It's a bit of a daunting process. There's legal complexity involved. And ultimately there is uncertainty about whether a judge will grant your petition. And this is something we think will increase with the new laws. When the eligibility criteria were very limited, just to 1 felony or 2 misdemeanors, judges granted a pretty high percentage of those cases. With the eligibility criteria much broader, we're anticipating that probably there will be some pushback from judges on the kinds of convictions and the kinds of records that warrant expungement. And that's something I think we're going to see more local variation around. So next is the marijuana process. And this is actually a better process in a variety of ways. First thing, there is a different form. They created a new form to guide people through this process. It's MC 227A. And this is for a very specialized subset of people with convictions. This is for people who just have or just want to expunge a conviction or convictions for marijuana possession or use that was charged as a misdemeanor. We know from the campaign that there's almost 250,000 people out there in Michigan that fit that description. It's a big group of people. But if people have marijuana felonies, or if they want to expunge marijuana convictions and some other ones, this is not the process for them. But it does have a lot of advantages for people that are looking to get marijuana convictions off their record. There is no waiting period to apply. There's no conviction limits, and there's no eligibility carve-outs. it doesn't matter what else a person has on their record. You can seal as many marijuana misdemeanors as you want through this process. And there's limited judicial discretion to decline to grant those. There's also a much simpler filing process. There's way fewer procedures. There's not a FBI background check, and there doesn't even have to be a hearing. That's optional. So this leads to a much faster process potentially. In fact, the marijuana expungement process is one with some advanced preparation can actually be done in a single day. The main things that would need to be done in advance is gathering the application materials, securing the local prosecutor's agreement not to contest the case, and having a judge who's ready to rule on the petition. And we're aware, just from talking to folks who are doing expungement fairs, that there are folks trying to do one-day marijuana expungements. I believe there's an expungement fair scheduled for July 2 in Flint that is going to attempt to do some of those. And we're very much looking forward to seeing how that goes, because a one-day expungement could be a real game changer for a lot of people. And that hasn't been possible in the past due to all the procedural requirements of the petition process. So that brings us to right now. What's next? So some of you may have heard that there was a bill to make first offense drunk driving eligible for expungement that passed late last year. The governor chose not to sign that bill. So we are involved in trying to pass that again this year. The legislative compromise on that appears to be that first offense drunk driving will be eligible to be sealed after a 5-year waiting period, without any additional limitations. There was conversations within the legislature about requiring some proof of interlock or sobriety, and those requirements we opposed because they would create more barriers to access for people. And we know that there's in the range of 200,000 people in Michigan that just have a single drunk driving. The narrative around drunk driving as an offense is that people who get drunk driving are just caught once, but they're doing it all the time. And I think there's some question about whether that's the case, and certainly as a policy matter, we shouldn't assume it is. There's a lot of people that have 15 or 20-year-old drunk drivings and have stayed on the straight and narrow since. And in our view, those people deserve the opportunity to seal that record and get a genuine second chance. So we're hopeful that bill will pass, ideally before the summer. It's already passed the House. It's passed out of committee in the Senate. So if the Senate, with a few changes, votes on it in the next few weeks, we're likely to see that pass before the summer break in the legislature. If that doesn't happen, we're optimistic that will happen in the fall. We're going to work on a couple other things. There are some technical fixes that we think need to happen to the bills that passed last year. There's some new language around waiting periods that's created problems for people who have intervening convictions. And I can talk more about that in the Q&A if that'd be helpful. We'd also like to accelerate the effective date for the automatic expungement for jurisdictions that are ready to start. And the main reason for that is that different courts need to do very different things to implement this law. About 70% of the local courts are on a case management system called the Judicial Information System that's run by the state, and the state can update that system pretty quickly. Not going to need 2 years to do it. So for those 70% of courts, we'd like to see them rolling out the automatic system as soon as they're ready. The other 30% may well need the full 2-year implementation period for the automatic expungement. And we'd like to let them go at their own pace, but not hold back other jurisdictions that are ready to roll it out. But to do that, additional legislation needs to pass. Finally, we're working with local jurisdictions and state agencies on meeting the technical requirements to implement this law. And we've got some national partners working on that, including Code for America, which is a national nonprofit that does technical assistance on these issues. They are involved in the rollouts of the Pennsylvania and Utah laws, among others. Finally, we're doing a lot of events like this. We're talking to service providers, members of the public, and other key stakeholders that are interested in helping us get the word out about the new law, and also help us get the word out about legal resources. You know, as I said before, I think it's important that people know what resources are available, because there is additional complexity in this law that didn't exist before it was passed. Overall, I think the expansions of eligibility are really, really positive, but there are some downsides to the way the law was written. So my recommendations are, first, if you or your client or the person who's interested in getting an expungement has an income within 200% of the federal poverty line, and I know many clients of MICA affiliated organizations would fall into that category, then legal aid is a really great option. Legal aid has internal expertise to do expungements. They do a lot of them, and they're really knowledgeable. Legal aid can also leverage pro bono resources through local bar associations and law firms. This is a really great resource, particularly in population centers like Detroit, and Lakeshore Legal Aid has great relationships with the local law firms there. For people who are not within 200% of the poverty line, but still would like to access expungement, we recommend Michigan Legal Help. Michigan Legal Help is a service for people who want to act as their own lawyer, but it's actually run by the Michigan Advocacy Program, which is a project of one of the major legal aid organizations. So they have really good expertise, and they actually have some really interesting online tools as well, including an eligibility tool and a toolkit to guide people through the process. In addition, Michigan Legal Help operates online and phone intake for legal aid, and they can also answer basic questions for people that want to call. And we've heard from them that they're not overwhelmed with calls about expungement. So, you know, feel free to try them. We have heard, incidentally, that other resources are kind of overwhelmed with requests. And so we do recommend Project Clean Slate, which is a project of the city of Detroit. But they do have limited resources. And last I heard, they were looking at about a 5,000 person backlog for their services. So I'd recommend reaching out to Lakeshore Legal Aid if you're not getting a quick response from Project Clean Slate. And Project Clean Slate, of course, is only for residents of the city of Detroit. So if you live outside Detroit, please do look at legal aid. For people that are interested in planning expungement events in their area, that is something that we are very interested in helping with. And we're partnering with legal aid to do that. But legal aid has their own expungement initiatives going. And this is the contact information for the pro bono coordinator for the regional legal aid organizations. And each of these people, I'm sure, would be happy to talk about planning an expungement fair in their area. So feel free to reach out to these folks as well if you are hoping to plan an expungement fair. The other thing I'd note about resources is that Michigan Works received $4 million from the State Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity to help with expungements. And different Michigan Works offices did different things with that funding, but legal aid is partnering with Michigan Works in a number of areas, and Michigan Works is helping defray the costs of applying to expungement. They've also hired lawyers or non-lawyer expungement navigators to help with the process in various places. So that's another resource to try and leverage in support of expungement fair planning, and also just in support of individual expungement cases. And with that, I will open things up for questions. and turn things back to Laurel.
Thank you, John, and thank you for sharing that information. I do see that some people have been sending in questions, so please feel free to use that chat box to send in questions to John or Josh. There's a lot of information here that I imagine folks are still processing. So thank you for everything that you shared. Am I reading the questions, or is there another person? Oh, I see another poll is up first, actually.
Yeah, folks should respond to the poll if possible. And I do have a list of questions that were sent to me, so I'm happy to triage those. And as the lawyer from our organization, I think I'm probably going to be answering most of these. So we've got some great questions here, and I'll just go through them in the order that I've got them. First, will sealed records be counted in the calculation of sentencing guidelines for subsequent felony convictions? And the answer is yes. The way the Michigan record sealing process works is it seals the public record. So landlords, employers can't see that record. Law enforcement still can. And one of the, I think, conditions for passing broader legislation on expungement was making sure that law enforcement can use that a prior conviction to charge someone as a habitual offender or to incorporate it into a subsequent sentence. And the reality is, like, most people who get expungements don't commit subsequent felonies, and that, I think, is why this was a positive trade-off. But for those that do, that is a consequence of the current system, is that that prior criminal history is taken into account in subsequent criminal proceedings. We have a question after that. Well, first, there is a question about whether the slides will be available, and I'm happy to do that. I can send them to Laurel to circulate. And we've also got access to a broader range of resources for people to use. We have a resource page on our website. And we also have a lawyer's training that folks may be interested in. That was put on by Lakeshore Legal Aid, and it's something we've been sharing with people who want to get more into the details of how to apply. The next question is whether this will seal a record from the Department of Health and Human Services too. And the short answer to that is it depends. And it depends how that record is going to be used by DHHS. So in most cases, the answer is yes, that should not be visible to DHHS. But for employment with the state, for example, I believe you could run into issues. And this is particularly an issue when it comes to employment with law enforcement, Department of Corrections, and public schools, because there is a broader background check that comes with those kinds of employment.
Hey, John, I just wanted to say, I think that SNAP prohibition got rolled back last session too. That was in part of that question. Is
that what the question was about?
Yeah, it says drug felony automatically denies them from getting food stamps, which I think got rolled back last October.
Okay, that didn't make it. That didn't make it to me. So yes, there has been a federal exclusion from eligibility for food assistance since 1996 if a person has multiple drug felonies on their record. States had the opportunity to opt out of that exclusion through a waiver, and Michigan never did it. So finally that happened at the end of last year. I believe that there may still be some exclusions of eligibility for certain kinds of convictions, but in general, food assistance is more available to people now. And that was actually not part of the expungement law. That was something else. And just in case it wasn't clear from the presentation, only state convictions are covered by this expungement law. So if you have a federal case, and many drug convictions in Michigan are prosecuted federally, that is not something we can seal under state law. That's something the federal government has to decide to do. And of course, along the same lines, This is only sealing Michigan convictions. It has no effect on convictions in other states. I guess I should also mention that if we're talking about other collateral consequences, firearm rights, driver's licenses, other administrative rights and privileges, such as occupational licensure. This is helpful in getting those things, but there is an additional process one needs to go through. So with firearms, you need to get licensed through the state police. With occupational licensing, you need to go through a licensing process with the State Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs. So simply having the conviction seal is not going to accomplish those things. And there still is the possibility that a conviction could ultimately be used as grounds to deny a person for an occupational license or firearm. However, expungement will make that much more likely that a person can get those rights back. Okay, so moving on. If someone has a felony charge for marijuana from 2003, but it was only given probation, can they have that expunged? Yes. And that's actually a conviction that could have been expunged before these laws passed, so long as the person had no more than 2 misdemeanors on their record. That's felony marijuana possession has been eligible for expungement in the past. And this will actually be eligible to be expunged through the automatic process because that is a non-violent conviction. The only exception would be possession above a certain amount is punishable by more than 10 years in prison. So the high-level possession crimes are not eligible under automatic. And some of the highest level possession crimes are punishable by life in prison, which means they are not eligible for expungement at all. So it depends a little bit on the amount that is possessed. But in general, I should add, convictions that are punishable by life are not eligible under either process, and neither are criminal sexual conduct convictions. There's a small exception to 4th degree criminal sexual conduct, which is a misdemeanor. If the conviction is from before 2015, those convictions are eligible. Post 2015, they're not. And that was due to a law that was passed in 2015. Okay. Just let me get the next question queued up here. There's a question, how could we host an event to do expungements? So those, and this is from someone in the Washtenaw County area. So there's a lot of great resources in Washtenaw County. First of all, the local prosecutor is actually running expungements out of their conviction integrity unit. And they're really helpful in getting people the documentation they need to apply. They don't represent people because they're the other side of all these cases, so they can't. But they are really helpful in getting expungements. I was actually on a panel yesterday with the Washtenaw County prosecutor for the state bar, and they're very interested in helping people get expungements. And I've heard there is an expungement fair for Washtenaw County in the works. I haven't heard who's putting that on, but we're likely gonna be involved in what's planned. And if we're not, we're happy to plan another one because this is an area of great need. And we've sort of been waiting for the University of Michigan to get its COVID protocols sorted out because we'd like to involve the law school and law students in that. So I think folks in Washtenaw, you're likely to get a lot of opportunities to do expungements, but feel free to reach out to the local legal aid folks there. They're great. Let's see. So I've got a few questions about additional presentations. We're happy to do presentations. We usually, just because we have limited resources, ask people to try and get at least 50 people together for us. But if that's not possible, we are willing to be flexible, particularly for underserved areas and organizations. So if anyone wants to work with us to plan a presentation like this one for a different constituency or area or organization, we're happy to do that. Please feel free to reach out. Our office line is info@safeandjustmichigan or safeandjustmi.org. That's the best place to go to get a call back from us. I get a lot of email, and it's the sort of thing that might get lost in the shuffle if you email me. So just a word to the wise there. So this is a great question. How does someone find out if they qualify? So for the automatic expungement, people are not going to be notified they're eligible. That's part of why we're doing this, is to tell people there's going to be an automatic expungement coming and you may be eligible. So we're going to be doing a lot more outreach. There's going to be media and advertising and much more aggressive outreach closer to the effective date for automatic. So right now we're really focused on the petition process because that's what people can take advantage of. And, you know, there's not proactive outreach happening to people who are eligible for petition, you know, beyond sort of what we're able to do. So if you know someone who might be eligible or newly eligible, please tell them and feel free to direct them to our website or to the other resources that we've provided here. You know, it's the sort of thing that people may not find out on their own, so we need to tell them. And, you know, this is an expungement can be a truly transformative thing. You know, as Josh discussed, you know, within the first year of getting expungement, people see their incomes skyrocket. And that's because a conviction can really be a problem for a person getting work at all, or for getting work that has a meaningful opportunity to advance. So this is a really potentially life-changing thing for people. So like talk to people about it that you come into contact with. And, you know, if your organizations would like handouts or forms from us, we have resources to help print those things. So please reach out. We're happy to help. Okay, let's see. If you have a criminal record in another state, you'll have to go there before you're able to take care of cases in another state. Yes. Yeah, this is unfortunately a consequence of federalism. You know, each state has their own eligibility process. Some states don't offer expungements at all, or very limited expungements, even by petition. Michigan is, by a variety of measures, the easiest place in the country to get your record sealed now. And that is largely because of the laws that were passed. So other states, it's a different issue. And, you know, there are not organizations like ours in every state either. So finding resources on expungements and how to get them is going to be a challenge other places as well.
John, just one other piece of bright news. There is a federal clean slate bill proposed currently, just because you were talking about federal earlier.
You know, I've heard from people in other states and working at the federal level that the law we passed here has really set a new standard nationally for what people should be doing. And, you know, that's one of the really important things about doing state level work is, you know, states actually look to one another for policy guidance. And once a state decides to do something and people are really benefiting from it, that creates pressure for other states to do the same. So, you know, this is a popular program. We're hearing from legislators that like this is like one of the things they get calls about the most from their constituents. And this is an opportunity for legislators to show people that government actually works for them. This is government working to address a need and get government out of people's lives. So like, I think, you know, lawmakers and other public officials should be really excited about getting the word out about this. We're doing the best we can to do it, but we need help. And we need help, you know, talking to lawmakers about this, because lawmakers can be hesitant to change criminal justice laws. They get called soft on crime. You know, they get accused of prioritizing the needs of criminals. And so they need to hear from their constituents and say, hey, this is a good thing. Thank you for doing this. Can you keep doing reforms like this? Like legislators need to hear that, because if they don't, they only hear from opponents. And that is bad for getting legislation passed, I can assure you. So there's a question about juvenile records, I see, and I'm going to skip ahead of that one because that is actually very salient. Juvenile records are, most people think juvenile records are automatically confidential. That is not true in Michigan. Thankfully, there was a companion bill. It was SB 681 and 2 that passed late last year on the heels of the Clean Slate laws we've been talking about today. Those reformed the juvenile expungement process, and we are going to be partnering with a partner organization, MCYJ, that led that effort on an informational webinar about the new juvenile expungement laws that will likely be in July. Briefly, though, there is a juvenile expungement process, and it was reformed recently to help bring Michigan into the mainstream where most juvenile records are presumptively confidential. But we hear frequently from people with juvenile records that are being found by background check companies and landlords and employers. So that is an area of need. And the other thing I would say about that is that that's an area of need where there's less legal support. You know, juvenile expungements are kind of a niche thing. It's not a wheelhouse issue for legal aid or other legal services providers. So the infrastructure to help people get juvenile expungements is not there the way it is for the adult expungement process. Okay. So the question about whether it's better for people to apply themselves or get a lawyer. I think if you can get a lawyer, particularly free, it's better to have a lawyer do it. So, you know, friends or family that have some time to help. Like I know from talking to lawyers that expungements are something that is pretty rewarding to do. Like it's a way to meaningfully change someone's life. And that's not, and I speak this as someone who practiced law for 7 years. That is not something that lawyers get to do every day. And, you know, many lawyers, particularly if you have a relationship with them, I think would be happy to at least do some preliminary work to help out. Similarly, like legal aid, pro bono resources, they're out there, they're worth taking advantage of. If you're unable to access those resources, it's worth trying to do it on your own. There's good resources out there through Michigan Legal Help and others. And, you know, I think the guidance is clear enough so that if you're able to go through the process of confirming what your record is, confirming your eligibility, getting the right materials together and filed in the right place, that should go a long way towards ensuring a successful outcome. Can't make any promises, of course, but this is something that non-lawyers can do. It just requires a level of care and attention to detail. Okay. So I got a question from a person who's working to house people with records. How can I access these services? I mean, one of the challenges here is that it takes time to get a petition sealed and people need housing immediately. You know, getting someone into the legal aid process is better than nothing because getting a record sealed, you know, 6 months from now is still better than not getting it sealed. And we all know there's frequent flyers in every place, you know, people that are cycling in and out of shelters and the justice system, and getting those folks help is really important to meeting the needs in the community for safe and affordable housing. So, you know, I think it's worth doing, at least as on a referral basis, but it's not going to solve the problem with getting housing immediately. You know, what has been done in some places, so Jackson, for example, Detroit, have passed local ordinances that restrict background checks for housing applications. And I know that's been controversial in those places, but that is one way of helping to remove some of these barriers. And, you know, there's activity in other places to try and change the standards. I know there is activity with public housing authorities to change their admission criteria as well. And I think there may be further work on that. It's an issue that we're looking at as well. But the public housing is not a majority of the available housing out there. Most housing is in private hands. So there's limits to what we can do sort of at the state level there. There's not currently support for state level ban the box on housing applications. The legislature actually preempted a local ban the box ordinances around employment a couple years ago after those kinds of efforts were starting to take off locally. So it's not a perfect situation, but I think between local ban the box work and what's happening at the state level around record sealing, we are seeing progress on housing access, and that's happening with the help of impacted people and service providers such as yourselves. I don't know if we mentioned how helpful it was to have Micah supporting the Clean Slate effort, but the housing angle on this was not one that was well understood in Lansing, and having Micah and you all involved in that campaign really did help improve the case for change. So thank you. And we'd like to do what we can to continue to work on these issues going forward. We know this did not solve the problem of housing insecurity or discrimination against people with records. So we're going to keep working, and we want to work closely with service providers because ultimately, like, telling the stories and having the on the ground the perspective really does help change lawmakers' perspective. That is really important in our experience.
Thank you, John. I just want to chime in, Laurel, with Micah again, to just comment on the value that this legislation is bringing to the lives of the people who are experiencing homelessness or housing insecurity. For those on the call who are service providers, I just want to emphasize the opportunity that this provides, and I know that there is a lot happening in our world right now with federal funding to try and make sure people stay in their homes, with our emergency rental programs, and with other floods of federal funds that are helping us to serve folks during this pandemic. And so I know there's a lot on service providers' plates right now. But we also know that need is going to be increasing as well as our eviction moratoriums are lifted, as that funding starts to slow down. And so take the time now to build the relationships with the legal aid partners that John has outlined, and with those lawyers who are interested in doing this work in your community. Bring them into your networks, your COC meetings, your LPB meetings, any kind of relationships that you have as a service provider, because building those relationships now and having access to those services and resources will help you in the long run as you're trying to assist these guests and clients that you're serving. And and we know as well that folks sometimes don't know what is on their record. And so making sure that you have a process in place now to check and confirm and get that documentation in place, I think, again, taking the steps now are really going to benefit you in the long term and benefit the folks that you're serving. And that is all possible because of the work that Safe and Just Michigan did to get this passed. And so we are extremely grateful and honored to have you present to our folks. I did hear a couple different types of resources that may be available. We'll continue to make sure that those get out and that people have the information, because this is a life-changing opportunity for a lot of people. So thank you. And I believe we're wrapping up at 4 o'clock. Is that correct?
I think so. And with it being 3:59, the last thing I'll say is just, we did get a few questions about resources for expungements in other states. The best sort of top level resource we have on that, there's a national organization called the Collateral Consequences Resource Center. They have compiled state specific resources, and I put the link to their state resource page in the chat. And I think we don't have that up on our own resource page, so we'll add that because that's a good suggestion. And with that, I just want to thank you guys for your time. I know you're super busy, and we appreciate the work that you're doing and taking some time away from it to learn about these new laws. please look at us as a resource on these laws and other criminal justice policy issues. That really is our, a big part of our mission. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you. And I just want to also thank the staff that's on the call from Safe and Just Michigan who made this webinar go so smoothly. Thank you to your entire team. And am I turning it back over to someone for some final comments, I believe?
Yeah, I'm going to close us out. Thank you so much, Laurel, for being our MC for the event. Safe and Just Michigan and the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness want to thank you for your participation in today's event. We will be hosting more webinars down the line, so please keep an eye out throughout the spring and summer. Thank you again for your participation and questions for today's panel.